All right, thank you, Sonny. That was great. Let's take your questions. We have microphones, so please wait for the microphone and state your name and affiliation and ask a question. Okay. So let's go right here in the front, over here.
Hi, Bonnie.
Strategic and International Studies. Very good to see you, Sonny. And very interesting data. I have lots of questions, but I will limit myself to two. You mentioned in one of your slides up front, I think the question, something like what motivates China to put pressure on North Korea. But you didn't really get at that. So I'd like to perhaps press you to address that and maybe comment on my own theory, which is that when the Chinese fear that there is a likelihood of military conflict on their border, on the Korean Peninsula, then they tend to take action. We saw this in 2003 with the alleged cutoff for 3 days of oil supply to North Korea. And we saw this, of course, at the end of 2010 after the firing on Yongpyong-do, where the Chinese used some diplomatic pressure. And there are some other examples, but I think that it's important I think it's a very important question, and I think that one of the strategies that the Obama administration is now pursuing is by tightening U.S., Japan, South Korea cooperation, there is a hope that that will put pressure on China to act, because it would lead to a deterioration in China's security environment. So I'd like to hear your comments on that question. And the second question, very briefly, I agree with you that Chinese do have concerns when they think about reunification, about the United States, U.S. presence on the peninsula, and the future intentions of the U.S. ROC alliance. I've also heard concerns from many Chinese about the possibility that South Korea would seek to inherit the nuclear weapons. And so you didn't mention that as a piece, and I'm wondering if that's because you didn't pose the question. But I'd be interested in your comments on those. Thank you.
Well, I think, concerning the second question, I think Ambassador Pritchard, has better perspective. But I think you're right. There are many. The right wing in South Korea, they believe that when the unification happens, the nuclear weapons from North Korea is automatically becomes, the possession of the unified Korea, and we can become a unified Korea with nuclear weapons that boosts our security profile in the region. I think that's correct. The first question, I think this is probably the most interesting question that Bonnie raised, and I also agree with you that Chinese concerns itself, Chinese fears is the presence of it. The entity, the very entity of Chinese fears have been so underestimated. In international narrative, we always very simplistically say, oh, China is, well, time is up, right? We just simply say, oh, China is not, acting responsibly, even though, it's becoming bigger and powerful. We always accuse our fingers, but China also has its own concerns, right? And sometimes the fears, sometimes to the level of, how should I politically correctly put this, to the realm of, almost realm of paranoia. They're really deeply concerned about some of these issues, the rising nationalism of South Korea. And these factors have been very much underestimated, or even not mentioned at all in our discussions often, including journalistic writing. So that's one thing. And what motivates China to work with the United States and Seoul and Japan in persuading North Korea to give up nuclear weapons? I think if you look at the history of the bilateral relation between China and North Korea, it's not really a friendly relations. It's more like a couple who are about to divorce, but then because of face saving or out of their own practical reasons or economic aid, or they're just restraining their impulse to go into court and file a divorce court. So I think that is one of the biggest misunderstanding. So I think a different way of approaching this question is that, given the terrible relations for decades between North Korea and China, why Washington and Seoul have been so unsuccessful in having Beijing on their side and push and pressure North Korea to give up nuclear weapons? I think these are very interesting questions, and I think you know the answer.
Yeah, right.
Eric McVeigh, the Institute for Foreign Policy Analysis. I hope it will give you some reassurance. In 2003, 3 of us from my PA went to China and visited 10 institutions that we thought were doing the central work on China-North Korea issues. We got the answers that you got today, that you presented to us, much the same way. Maybe not so eloquently put, but we asked, and those were the things that they expressed to us. But it dawns on me that now we have confidence in this, so there is another survey, another bit of analysis that we might think about moving on to. If North Korea will not give up its nukes, then how do we transform the situation? In other words, we don't accept that what we got is now in concrete, but we figure out how we bring about change so that we have a different situation, so that there can be a North Korea, for example, that might find that it can relinquish its nukes. And I think that applies to other questions as well. So the question we ask now is, how do we proceed to change things that seem impossible?
Shall I take that as a comment, not as a question?
Well,
because I don't have that answer. Actually, Ambassador Pritchard and I discussed this, touched upon this matter prior to this, session. North Korea is unwilling to give up nuclear weapons. Even Chinese don't think North Korea will give up nuclear weapons. Then how do we proceed from here, right? And the Chinese, I just quote a Chinese expert answer to this, is that he used to work for the foreign ministry in charge of North Korean issues. I think many of you know him personally, but I won't name names. But he said it's not a matter of whether North Korea is willing or unwilling. It's a matter of we have to make it give up nuclear weapons. That is much more important. I think that is the answer that he told me, and I think that is the correct answer, but then that also puts up the same challenge of how Washington and Beijing so cooperate each other on this issue, and trust building and all these issues that brought up here. I think that's, so make it give up, and that's, right?
Right here.
Gil Rosman, Princeton University.
Hi.
Hi. How much do you think views of South Korea influence Chinese views of North Korea? You may have read the new book in Chinese by a professor at the Asia Pacific Institute, Do Shangrong, in which he carefully examines the South Korean views of Chinese, some very similar survey to what you've just done. And she, like you just said, argues that there is a very strong sense of distrust between the two countries, and it seems to have worsened significantly even before you point out this change of position towards North Korea. And the cultural issues are so much a part of it. So are you suggesting that South Korea try to win China's trust by changing its views on Goguryeo, or on the Dragon Festival, or any of the other cultural issues at the center of this? Or because you emphasize so much the Chinese sense that South Korea doesn't really matter, it's the United States, and this is the big security issue, is the only thing that would really help South Korea with China changing its alliance position with the United States in a way that China would feel reassured?
Thank you. And sometimes for the sake of emphasizing one thing and making the point clear, you underestimate or less emphasize other valid points. And I think thank you for bringing that up. I think this is also that South Korean government is neglecting in a sense. Let me give you an example. 2009, when Kim Jong-un visited China, May, South Korean President Lee Myung-bak visited Shanghai, participating in the Shanghai Expo. And Chinese CCTV television interviewed Lee Myung-bak, and all the questions are pre-prepared. But then Chinese journalists posed one question that was not scripted. Mr. President, what do you think about the growing tension on the internet between Chinese and South Korean people? What do you think about it? And Lee Myung-bak's answer was that, that happens all the time between neighbor countries and other countries. It's not a very serious issue. The views on the internet, they not represent the mainstream views. So don't worry about it. I heard this episode from the Chinese journalist who goes about different Chinese universities and shared this episode to hundreds of Chinese students off the record. I don't know how that becomes off the record when so many people know. Don't say this to South Koreans off the record, just let you know. But then there are like hundreds of audiences there. But anyway, he wanted to be, off the record. So I think, there are great downplaying or lack of awareness from the part of South Korea, how Chinese people view some of these concerns. And South Korean, particularly the Lee Myung-bak government, has been underestimating. These days, very interesting. There are 60 to 70,000 Chinese students in South Korea studying. They are very fluent in Korean. When there are negative comments about China or South Koreans' expression of nationalistic, we have to reclaim our lost territory in Manchuria, it's almost immediately translated and just spread into the Chinese web forums, and it becomes a snowballing effect. And it's really, I think it shouldn't be underestimated. Now, I think South Korean government got it, but it's a bit too late. I, made this point, and there are some other scholars made this point, but the government has been very slow in responding. November 10, South Korea's largest conglomerate company, Samsung, launched a new product, Galaxy, in Shanghai. I'm not sure, some of you probably saw this. And they showed a map showing a greater China market that Samsung is targeting. But then they neglected Taiwan from the map. And the boundary along the line of old South Korean kingdom, Goguryeo, that region was a little bit blurred. And the Chinese bloggers, they made a circle on that problematic map and spread all over the Chinese internet. That was belatedly founded and aware, and I told Samsung about it, and they trying to deal with the matter. These are really very sparky issues, very easily create and shapes the Chinese perception about South Korea, and also the Chinese increased Chinese unwillingness in terms of all this South Korea, so-called South Korea's ambition. Chinese internet bloggers always tend to say, characterize South Korea as a small country with big ambitions. Small country with big ambitions. The big ambition means that we want to become a middle power. We want to balance between Washington and Beijing. We want to reclaim our lost territory in Manchuria. Those kind of things are very looked upon from Chinese side as a very negative and nationalistic way. Thank you.
Gregory?
Greg Scarlatti, Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. Thank you for an excellent presentation. I have 3 quick questions. The first one, you asked the experts about their travel to South and North Korea. Have you also considered asking them if they have participated in long-term degree programs in South and North Korea? The second question, the pie chart indicates that 9% of the experts surveyed are in favor of a unified Korean peninsula on the South Korean terms with U.S. troops on their territory. The same pie chart indicates that 46% are in favor of a unified Korea neutral between the U.S. and China, 26% neutral and with no U.S. troops on its territory. Does it actually matter does it mean that the difference, 43 minus 26, 17% actually are in favor of a unified Korean peninsula with U.S. troops on its territory? And the third question is, well, actually we need your advice. As a resident senior media expert with a direct line to heaven, what is your advice?
That's correct.
Yes, I got that right.
Please go and write that down in your blog.
What is your advice to us? China is very self-conscious when it comes to its international image. What is it going to take for us, human rights experts and advocates, to get them to pay attention to the human rights issues in North Korea, the political prisoner camps, and also to abide by their obligations under the 1951 Refugee Convention and stop forcibly repatriating North Korean refugees? Thank you very much.
Let me answer the third question first. China is rising, and rising country superpower is lonely. Lonely means that you are misunderstood by other countries. During misunderstanding, including human rights record, is so natural. So China doesn't give a damn about human rights on that issue. They're willing to. Please don't write it down. It will give you trouble going back to China, right? So this is a mentality. We are rising superpower. Rising superpower is when you are rising and you have your own idealism, dreams, and becoming. You have to struggle without other powers. You are rising and you don't have any friends. That's so natural. So you have to endure a period of being lonely. You are being misunderstood. But when you become number one, ahead of the United States, then you will be respected. You will be feared. Then that will settle all these challenges, disputes about human rights and whatsoever that will be, behind the story. What was your second question?
The second question was
troops.
The pie chart.
The troops neutral on it.
Yeah.
Being neutral on the peninsula.
The pie chart indicates 9% in favor of unified Korean peninsula with U.S. troops on the 38th parallel. However, the same pie chart indicates that 43% would be in favor of a neutral South Korea, neutral between China and the United States.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Let me answer the question this way.
Right. Once again, with U.S. troops on Korea.
Right. And there is a. Let me answer this way. Chinese scholars, they told me that there are these and these factors, percentages, but there is one factor that is not mentioned here. If you guys, South Koreans, North Koreans, if you guys are willing to unify, and you guys are so strong-willed about it, then we cannot help it. You just will do it, and we are not going to block it, or we are not going to interrupt the process. I think that is the kind of experience from German unification as well. Both West Germany, East Germany, they are very much willing to unify together, and it was their drive which brought other stakeholders, because the two Germanies are very so strong in like-minded, for unification. I think that was the factor that was missing, but then privately shared with me. I think if the two Koreas themselves are willing to unify, and both are willing very much, and other stakeholders, they are at least not going to block the process. I think that's the Chinese sentiment here.
So for that one, you're talking about U.S. troops. So if you have both South Korea and North Korea pushing for it, unification, and U.S. troops are on the peninsula, then the scholars that you talk to would be okay with that?
There is one factor here is that I mentioned this, Korea is very nationalistic. When there is a unification achieved, and probably North Korea's nuclear weapons automatically becomes a possession of unified Korea, a strong nationalistic Korea will become more independent-minded. That means that there is a sense of identity that they are willing to move away from their mental reliance or physical reliance in terms of military from the United States. That's the factor there that was missing that I've not mentioned.
Right here in the front.
Yes, sir.
All right, Skip Sharp, retired U.S. Army. In the question of nukes in North Korea, reunification, can you comment on the similarities and the differences between the Chinese political side, their party side, versus the PLA, the military side? So what similarities, what differences in views do those two sides in China have, and what carries more influence for this specific issue of nukes and unification?
Thank you for the question. One thing that is very important is that here, I should not pretend to know something that I don't know. This one is, I don't know.
Take a couple questions. We'll go right here and then back to Chad, right? Just two quick questions.
I'm Larry Nix from CSIS. One of the apparent failures of Chinese policies towards North Korea has been that since Deng Xiaoping in the 1990s, the Chinese at different points of time have put pressure on North Korea to institute real Chinese economic reforms. Deng Xiaoping certainly did, and there have been reports in the last 3 years that there has been a new round of urgings of North Korean leaders by Chinese leaders to institute Chinese-style economic reforms. But this has not happened. Kim Jong-un has been taken to the Shanghai Stock Exchange and special economic zones and all of those things, trying to impress him with the great progress that China has made economically. And he says he's impressed, but then he goes home and he doesn't go that course. Have any of these Chinese experts given you any of their thoughts about why China's policy in this regard has failed? Why China has not been able to break through and get the North Korean leaders to really begin to dismantle the institutional Soviet-style economic system that they have?
Thank you.
And then we'll go to Chad too.
Hi, Chad from the Korea Economic Institute. Yeah, you talked a lot about Chinese perspectives on North Korea, but what do you know of the reverse, like in terms of how the North Koreans look at the Chinese? How do they feel about this increasing reliance on China when, you know, a couple of decades ago they were able to obviously balance that with USSR as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Naoko. I just saw a journalist from Beijing Correspondent news agency. I don't think Chinese people see that as a failure. They think that it just takes some time to persuade North Korea to walk on the path of reform and opening up. One thing that I learned, living in China for 10 years is that their frame of, sense of time is really somewhat different. We South Koreans, we have a hot temper. We want to make it done right now, right? But Chinese people have, they have this 5,000 years of history and, all this, thing. But then there are really something about sense of time, when something does not change 10 years, why not try another 10 years? Why not try another 10 years? If my generation fails, then my son's generation will try the same. I think I'm not exaggerating, probably this is a little bit exaggerated, but this is kind of a grounding mentality that how Chinese psychology works here. So that when something does not work, and South Korea's sunshine policy does not work, strong hardline policy, but Chinese people, their frame of approaching methodology and thinking is slightly different. They have a different sense of time, I think. I think that, we also took some time, 100 years is okay. I think so. They don't necessarily see it as a failure. It just takes time. And they think that, they also point out that, Sonny, if you compare that 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, North Korea is opening up bit by bit. And I think that is also makes sense, right? Before that, a little bit. They see this, almost, unperceptible degrees of progress that, we cannot find, but they cannot still feel it, they are making progress. I think this is a kind of philosophical, different approach. But then Chad asked this very interesting question about North Korea's deepening reliance on China and how North Korea feels about it. Feels very bad. One thing, very interesting thing is that, as the survey shows, China has a very complicated feelings towards North Korea. And North Koreans are also very complicated feelings towards China as well. And that's why they are a couple about to divorce, but then they didn't go to the court to file the divorce. And China, North Korea, if you force me to, number one, number two, who they trust most, I think North Korea trusts the United States the most. And the least trust country, North Korea, is China. And they only talk about this privately. But then they have to work with. It's very complicated.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Fortunately, we're up on time, so let's get two more quick questions. One right here, and then one right here. Right here first, and then I think we'll end on these last two.
Okay, let's do today. This is off the record, okay? It's just a session that we kind of brainstorming together. Don't go out and write articles. I'll have a hard time returning back to Beijing.
I think it'll be all right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sonny. Paul Eckert of the Reuters News Agency. Nice to see you.
Hey, Paul.
It may be slightly beyond the purview of your survey, at least as what was presented. I haven't read the whole paper yet, but Chinese investment in North Korea, is it strategic in the sense of shoring up the government? Is it profit-seeking? They want to be the first ones in there because they believe that eventually North Korea will reform and then they'll have a jump on the South Korean cable? Or is it sort of more private or not private, but sort of more local level, just business opportunities and resource extraction.
And then one more, quick, yeah, right in the 2 rows back. Yeah, right.
Thank you. I'm John from reunification.
Hi. 안녕하세요.
Yes. One clarification regarding the relationship between China and North Korea. One quick question. What Washington Seoul need to do under the relationship? Thank you.
I hate difficult questions. Those Korean journalists. The investment part, those Hwang Geun-pyeong and Rajin Sambong, particularly the Hwang Geun-pyeong stuff, I heard from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences scholar that unlike the previous investment projects prior to Hwang Geun-pyeong, it was more like a local government initiative. And that's why it didn't work. Because in local government try, and there are a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of stamp, and North Koreans also, they have own demands. But this time, they're trying something different, because also, the Tumen River project, since 1991, it didn't go anywhere either, because it's, more like, that area of local government initiative. So this time, Hwang Geun-pyeong and those new projects central government is taking initiative. So simply because based on the experience that the previous local government initiative didn't work out. So this is a central government initiative. That's what I was told. And South Korean government is trying to find its own niche. They don't want this to be purely between China and North Korea project, because South Korea fears China's growing influence on North Korea. So South Korea is trying to find a room that South Korean companies, in a way, cooperate and getting into that position. But then the funny thing is that if you know the highway, the road, from Hunchun, Chinese city of North Hunchun to Rajin Sambong, that was supposed to complete, but then it has not been complete either, as far as my understanding is that it's very, very slow. So there are some, locally, some bureaucratic and, not things are on the track as we scheduled. But then, and what I'm hearing from China is that this time, many people say, this time it will be different. This time it will be different. And we'll see how it goes. And what Washington and Seoul need to do, I think you know better. You are in Washington, and I'm not in Seoul either. So what, I'm in Beijing. What I know what China's supposed to do. So you could come up with the answer what Washington can do, and people in Seoul can come up with what Seoul can do. You can cooperate together. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sunny. I think we're up on time, and as always, it's a pleasure to have you, and a pleasure to have all of you. Thank you all for coming. Please help me thank Sunny Lee. Thanks, everyone.